Hey, welcome back to this second video in our three-part series on coping, where today we're going to talk about the reveal and how to set it. So stay tuned. Okay, so in the last video we talked about the diameter of the coping and determined that 2 3/8 of an inch is the right size. It's good to stick with a standard because the reveal is actually going to be 3/8 of an inch. And of course, the reveal is how much of the radius of the pipe protrudes beyond the surface and the deck where you're going to come in contact with that coping on your trucks, your wheels, nose, tail, rails, everything. Okay, so on tricks like fakie ollies, frontside ollies, any kind of ollie, you're going to need that bonk where the wheels just, repels the wheels off enough to get you safely away from the lip and back down onto the transition. On tricks like blunts, where you need to be able to lock it in so that you can snap it out far enough to clear the lip. As far as I know, there are two methods to set coping, okay? The first is to actually set the pipe on the top rib and then raise the deck up and use a depth gauge and then roll the pipe forward, and you do it by feel. You can use a depth gauge or you can just kind of feel it with your hand, and when you get it to where you want it, you put a strip of plywood behind the coping, lock it in place, and then you put your layer down. Okay, if you want to learn about that method, you can go on to Ride Channel, which you can find on YouTube, and you can search for how to build a quarter pipe. There's a guy named Jonah Owings. He's up in Georgia, and he goes through that whole methodology, but the way we're going to use is by actually cutting a notch in the top of the transition. And the pipe is going to set in that notch, and you're going to pull it back against the top rib. Okay, it's a little more precise, and that's the way I like to do it. So let's get into that. A couple things you're going to need before we get started: a depth gauge. Take a piece of scrap 2x4, put it on a table saw, cut it at 1 inch thick. Coping gauge. This is just a 1/4 inch sliver that I cut off the end of a piece of 2 inch OD steel with an abrasive wheel and a chop saw, which took quite a while. You could do the same thing if you go down to Ace, or look in your shed. If you have a sprinkler system, you probably have some of this already. This is 2 inch OD, schedule 40 PVC. It's the exact same diameter as the steel, except for you can cut through this with a hacksaw in about 25 seconds. If you don't already have one, a speed square, get one at Harbor Freight for $3, and a drafting ruler, steel, accurate marks, a couple dollars at the same place, Harbor Freight. And lastly, a sharp pencil. Let's get busy. Okay, so what I have here is the top of a transition that I'm going to actually build a small prototype ramp with to demonstrate how the coping sets in place and how to achieve your getting your marks right. So take your speed square, make a mark at 1 inch. Okay, I have a drywall square. I'm just going to make our line for the deck reveal. Okay, so I went ahead and adjusted our angle of view to give us a little bit more of a close-up so I can explain why we went with a 1 inch mark here. Okay, and that's simply if you take your depth gauge, which is 1 inch overall, and combine that with your 1 inch inset, set your coping gauge into place, you can see a perfect 3/8 of an inch reveal. Now, if you're only going to use 3/4 inch ply and you're not going to include a layer of gator skins or masonite or whatever your final layer is going to be, you would just move this line down 1/4 of an inch to compensate. So you would measure from the top down 1 1/4 inches. Now that we have the mark for the deck reveal, we're going to make the mark for the transition. So take your depth gauge, put it flat against the transition edge, put your coping gauge right on that line we made, and then roll it forward using your ruler. Roll it right to 3/8 of an inch. And then readjust on your mark, make sure everything's lined up. Okay, take your pencil, and there's your mark. Last thing to do is take your square, place it right where that mark is, and then this is the notch we'll cut out. All right, before we make this cut, I just want to point out that I have these two transitions clamped together. We're going to gang cut them. and you want to cut on the inside of the line. So on the inside of this line in the area where the X is. Okay, so our notches are cut out. I'm going to go ahead and assemble this little prototype ramp so we can lay the coping in place, take a look at the final result. Okay, so to create this nice little notch where the coping's going to set, you're going to lay your 2x4 a little bit differently than you normally would. Obviously, you would always lay your 2x4 this way. But on the top one, in this case, you're going to lay it this way. Just want to make sure that you get the edge nice and flush with the edge of the transition, and that these corners are aligned. Corner of the 2x4 and the corner where the notch and transition come together here. As far as this one, it just lays as you normally would. Just make sure that you have the face of the 2x4 flushed up with the vertical portion of the notch here, and then of course flush on top here. All right, I'm working alone here, so I went ahead and screwed this depth gauge into the top rib to hold it in place, and then just clamp the steel ruler right to it. And the moment we've all been waiting for, let's find out. And our measurement is 7/16 of an inch. That's a mere 1/16 over our original goal of 3/8 of an inch. So 1/16 of an inch is really the best case scenario. That's probably as close to perfect as you can ever hope to get. If you don't hit that mark, it's fine as long as you're between 3/8 of an inch and I'd say 5/8 of an inch. That's a 1/4 of an inch margin of error to play in. You should be good. So if you do end up, let's say 3/4 of an inch, that's pretty much no man's land. You're still not completely hosed. What you can do is make a new mark 1/8 of an inch back on the vertical portion of the notch, and then take a belt sander and lay it on its side and shave it back a little bit. It's not all that hard to do, but if you took your time, kept a sharp pencil, made good cuts, you should be gold. So I hope that demystifies the dark art of setting coping and hopefully makes it a little more tangible, the process. Next time, we're going to fasten it in place, and that will end our series. So we'll see you then. I want to give a special shout out to azpx.com for the wardrobe. They got hats, shirts, and other shit online you can order. 100% skater owned and operated, so check them out.